My name is Ray Umphrey. I'm the pastor of Briggs Road Baptist Church in Columbus, Ohio, and I'm a PhD student at the Southern Baptist Theological Seminary in Louisville, Kentucky. The title of my paper is When Sermons Won't Structure Themselves, 3 Case Studies from Matthew's Gospel. In my paper, I'm arguing for an approach to structuring sermons, which is an alternative to following the structure of the text. Many expositors advocate using the syntactical structure of a pericope to construct the homiletic outline. And in many texts, that's a very valid form of structuring a sermon. But there are difficult texts that simply do not lend themselves well to replicating in a homiletic outline. I'm arguing that the textual outline and the homiletic outline should be seen as 2 independent entities, oftentimes having great correspondence, but not necessarily so. And in my paper, I argue for looking at the text and assessing what the text is doing. Beyond merely the semantics of the text, pragmatically, what is the text achieving in what it is saying? And so, looking at this, we want to first establish the proposition. What is the text saying? Then we want to look at the application. What is the text seeking to achieve as far as a response from the hearers or the readers? Those 2 poles are going to govern where the sermon begins and where the sermon ends. But in the middle, as far as the structure goes, we need to determine how best to get from point A to point B. 2 important factors are, number 1, the sequence of ideas. Now, many times an author will give you a sequence from 1 to 2 to 3 in the text, but oftentimes there is a logical sequence of ideas, particularly in a narrative text, which may not comport completely to the chronology of what's going on in the text. And the attentive expositor must isolate what is the logical sequence of ideas. Not only the sequence of ideas, but the weight of ideas. Many times we must give more weight to a smaller portion of text rather than a larger portion of text based on the density, if you will, the theological density or the weight of ideas present. I refer to 3 texts in the Gospel of Matthew. The first one I call a compact, dense text, and I use for my model the Beatitudes in Matthew chapter 5. I particularly focus in on one of the Beatitudes and develop a homiletic outline, showing that the aphoristic nature of the Beatitudes, combined with the ambiguity of the terms introduced, involves the expositor, number 1, to flesh out the terms and to arrange the content in a way that structures the ideas logically rather than following the flow of the text. Secondly, I look at what I call a circular text, and I look at Matthew chapter 13, verses 44 through 46, which gives the parable of the treasure in the field and the parable of the pearl of great price, 2 very repetitive parables. And in texts such as this or other texts which have significant parallelism, the concepts must be isolated from the text and then arranged in a logical order so that the ideas are presented without repetition. And then finally, I look at what I call an episodic text. In Matthew chapter 14, verses 1 through 12, which details the arrest and beheading of John the Baptist. This is an episodic text in that it stands alone as a flashback from the main events of the Gospel of Matthew. It interrupts the context somewhat, if you will, although it fits into the context, but it interrupts the flow of Jesus' ministry and provides us something that has happened before. It stands on its own. There are many factors in this text which make it unique. For example, verses 6 through 11, which comprise over half or near half of the narrative, merely give us the details of the birthday party and the details around Herodias' daughter seducing Herod and the promise that was made. A strictly textual outline would devote undue attention to the details of that party and would make the sermon more about a warning against lasciviousness, which that is not the point of the text. And so I argue for looking at the structure of the text, looking at what's going on at a rhetorical level. Furthermore, the text has a ring construction or an inclusio, beginning with a mention of Jesus and ending with a mention of Jesus. I argue that inclusio actually governs the way we interpret the passage. I hope that my ideas lend themselves to building a bridge from the text to the audience by carrying the ideas of the text in the best vehicle possible to communicate their full meaning. I don't offer this as a replacement for the textual outline, but merely as an alternative homiletic approach for those texts that are hard to structure and that simply won't structure themselves.